So as I'm recording this, the news has just gone around the world that the Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, has been killed on the orders of Donald Trump and the United States. World War III is trending on Twitter, but why don't we calm down a little bit and try to get a sense of what's been happening in Iran. Now, about a month back in November, there were a series of uprisings in Iran, and we discussed this on my show Unpopular Opinions, which my dad listened to and then felt compelled to write an essay detailing exactly what had happened from inside reports. So why don't we have a look to see what he said. On the 15th of November, the petrol price was increased by 300%, which sparked a spontaneous uprising in more than 100 cities and towns in Iran. Although the protests began as peaceful gatherings, they soon turned into violent riots and revolt against the Iranian government. The Iranian government employed lethal tactics in order to shut down the protests, including a nationwide internet shutdown, shooting protesters dead from the rooftops, helicopters, and at close range with machine gun fire. Government forces then proceeded to confiscate the bodies of dead protesters and truck them away in order to mask the true casualty count and severity of the protest. The families of murdered protesters were threatened by the government from speaking to the media or holding funerals. Although there is currently no conclusive casualty count, current estimates suspect the government killed well over 1,000 Iranian citizens. The government crackdown prompted violent reactions from the protesters, who destroyed 731 government banks, including Iran's central bank, 9 Islamic religious centers. They tore down anti-American billboards and posters and statues of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. 50 government military bases were also attacked by protesters. This series of protests have been categorized as the most violent and severe since the rise of Iran's Islamic Republic in 1979. In order to block the sharing of information regarding the protests and the deaths of hundreds of protesters on social media platforms, the government blocked the internet nationwide, resulting in a near total internet blackout for around 6 days. Tactics and methods. Protesters began by organizing rallies in protest of the Iranian government, resulting in police gunfire. As protests were met with government crackdowns, protesters began to block streets and highways. The protests intensified, with Iranians burning pictures and banners of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and burning government banks. However, evidently, in some places, burning of banks and petrol stations were done by the regime's agents as a pretext for brutal repression. Many protests, chants and slogans were directed at expressing discontent with the Iranian government's spending on conflicts in Gaza, Syria, Lebanon and Yemen. Other chants praised the late Reza Shah of Iran and wished a blessing for his soul, calling for his grandson, Reza, to come back, also chanting historical slogans from Iran's imperial past. Others were calling all fractions of the regime, fundamentalists, reformists, moderates and hardliners, the same corrupt mafia, liars and cheats. Repression. The government agents in Iran are accused of stealing the bodies of the dead protesters from morgues and arresting the injured from hospitals to give the uprising a lower profile. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and President Hassan Rouhani ordered deadly weapons to be used against the Iranians protesting the blatant rise in gasoline prices. Above all government entities, it is the Supreme National Security Council that makes decisions on how to deal with such demonstrations and to deal with political crisis. The council is presided over by the president. Iran's constitution prescribes that all decisions taken by the council should be approved by Ali Khamenei, who is the commander-in-chief of the Iranian armed forces. This map shows how many people were killed. You can see the dark red places show that more than 40 people were killed, and then as it gets paler, fewer people in those other regions. Now, from the regime's perspective, on the 17th of November, Supreme Leader of Iran, Khamenei, remarked that he is not an expert in this regard, but this policy has been adopted by the heads of the country based on expert opinion. Therefore, the decision should be acted on. He said that in any case, some people had become displeased, but setting fire to such and such a bank was not the action of the people. Rather, it was the action of thugs. Such actions were not carried out by ordinary people, Khamenei claimed. Of course, officials should also pay attention and decrease the problems associated as much as they can. Khamenei also blamed the protests on all of the centres of villainy around the world that oppose us, including the United States. Also, at a meeting with producers, economic activists and entrepreneurs on the 19th of November, he stated, "Both friends and foes should know that we have repelled the enemy in the war in military, political and security issues. The recent actions were security issues, not from the people. We have repelled the enemy in various areas, and by God's grace, we will also definitely repel the enemy in the economic war." It is a fact that the regime was surprised on the speed and the magnitude and the spread of the uprisings, and that it was mainly in the poorest districts of towns and shanty towns on the city's margins that this took place. In a few of his speeches, the old Ayatollah Khomeini had warned the elite, "Be afraid of the day when the poor and the oppressed know your true self and rise against you." Internet shutdown. On the eve of the protests, Iranian authorities started disrupting internet connections and social media. The internet was effectively blocked following Iran's Supreme National Security Council and their decision to shut it down for 24 hours. The disruptions increased in extent and severity, with impact also visible on overall connectivity charts. Iran's largest mobile network operators, including MCI, Ritel and Arancell, fell offline on the evening of the 16th of November 2019. By the 20th of November, national connectivity was at 5% of ordinary levels, making it difficult to monitor human rights violations and cover incidents on the ground. The government also jammed satellite TV connections and sent anonymous, intimidating messages to people near protest site reading, "We know you are here." On the 21st of November 2019, a small return of connectivity was tracked by net blocks, along with reports that some users had come online. National connectivity was up to 8% by that date. International reactions. The international media and governments around the world were strangely muted, and only after the event, the NGOs such as the UN Human Rights Commission and Amnesty International and a few heads of state condemned the Iranian government's actions. The internet shutdown is not a good excuse, as all these governments have intelligence reports directly from their embassies and networks within Iran. This could be that really all of these governments, one way or the other, in the past 40 years, have milked the mullahs or used them as a bogeyman to sell their arms to the neighbouring Gulf states. This has served the mullahs' strategy to survive very well, so they can blame everything on foreign enemies. Here will only suffice in bullet points some examples. USA, the great Satan, has used Iran as a bogeyman and sold trillions of dollars of weapons to the region through the Pentagon. Russia, it is clear that Khamenei and a few other ayatollahs studied in Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow before the 1979 revolution, and also most of the Revolutionary Guard generals are Russian agents. The regime has always done Russia's bidding in the region for Russia's support. Economically, Russia is involved in most industries in Iran and has dumped billions of dollars worth of weaponry on Iran and billions more on the out-of-date Bushehr nuclear power station and other nuclear-related activities. China, as the main Iranian oil customer, has been buying cheap oil way under the market price, and in return has sold low-quality industrial and consumer equipment, machineries and goods down to prayer mats and rosaries at top prices, and also whatever funds are left are kept in Chinese banks. Turkey, cheap oil and gas as a conduit for gold and currency. They've been engaged in sanction busting and exports. Turkey actually acts as a haven for the Iranian regime's stolen money. They also enjoy tourism and commerce. A lot of Iranians actually go to Turkey on holiday. Then there's the Gulf states, especially Dubai. They are the main conduits for money changing, transshipments of imports and exports, and they help the regime by investing in people and laundering their money and things like this. Then there's Israel, which has managed to grow stronger through the chaos that the Iranian regime has caused in the region. And while the region's attention is focused on Iran, obviously Israel has a permanent pretext to raise its own profile and power. Then there is France, which a lot of people may not know is in total control of the Iranian car industry. Then there is Germany, still after China, the biggest industrial partner of Iran. And then there is Britain. A famous saying in Iran is that if you shave a mullah's beard, underneath a Union Jack is tattooed. The Iranian oil company still operates out of London, and London is a hub for the investments of the many individuals involved in the regime. Then there are other countries around there: Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Armenia. All these countries were taken away from Iran in the 19th century by Russia or Britain. In the mullah's dream to re-establish their hegemony in the region, they have given these countries very favourable deals and concessions because one day they foresee them coming back into the Iranian or the Persian Empire. Then finally there is Iraq. After the Iran-Iraq war, Iraq actually owed Iran $152 billion in war reparations. But all of this money was forgiven, and in fact the regime have invested billions of dollars in infrastructure, and especially in things like Shia religious sites. They've spent a lot of money trying to kind of foster their own influence within Iraq. So what is the aftermath of all of this? Under the sanctions, the Iranian economy is shrinking. It has negative growth forecasted. Inflation is rampant and the local currency is flooring. The fuel hike will affect the price of all other goods and services. The industries are coming to a grinding halt or working at minimal capacity. People's salaries are not being paid for months on end, and although this uprising has apparently been quashed, the root causes have not been addressed. They have been exacerbated by the regime's harsh reaction. The ember is still well alight under the ashes and will break out at an accelerated pace. The patchwork of demonstrations and demands of various sectors, for example, steel workers, sugarcane workers, teachers, retirees, lorry drivers, farmers, etc., are joining together, and as we look at the timelines, the frequency of these events are decreasing while the intensity of them is increasing. Added to this increased repression and brutality by the regime and the daily examples of corruption cases which are revealed on social media, all of this indicates that the regime has lost its legitimacy among the intelligentsia and among the ordinary people, and especially among some of the poorest, as we heard earlier on. The regime's instruments of oppression. After the revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini set up a dual system in the country. The regular armed forces versus the Revolutionary Guards, for example, with its own army, navy and air force. The regular police versus the revolutionary committees. The regular intelligence services versus the Revolutionary Guards intelligence services. The regular judiciary versus the religious and the revolutionary courts. At stage 1, the regular police and the security forces are deployed. At the second stage, the Basij militias plain clothes are deployed. At the third stage, the Revolutionary Guards take over the running of the town, the city, the province, and the guards and the Basajis are mobilized. In the November uprising, this happened in Kurdistan, Kermanshah, and Khuzestan provinces. And then at the fourth and final stage, martial law is declared and the regular armed forces, in addition to the above-mentioned forces, are deployed. What are some of the tactics employed by the regime? In addition to the internet and phone networks, the following were implemented. 1. Shutting offices and commerce with the excuse of air pollution. Attacking and destroying people's properties, their cars, their front doors, their windows. Randomly beating people who were not even in the demonstrations just to cause fear, shutting down all universities, high schools and junior schools, deploying their forces in ethnically distinct areas to avoid family and local empathy, deploying mercenaries from Lebanon, Afghanistan and Iraq, rounding up and imprisoning a very large number of writers, intellectuals, lawyers and popular celebrities, news blackouts as if everything is normal and nothing is happening, promising to spend revenues raised by the petrol hike on the poorest income brackets, which is a divide and rule tactic, changing definitions and the rules of engagement, spreading influenza in the troubled provinces, so they're actually spreading disease in certain places, and massive floods in Kurdistan by opening the waters behind the large dams after 2 days of rain. So that's all my dad had to say, and as you can see, there's a lot of information there, which probably a lot of people watching this would not know, and certainly most of that was new to me as well. As to what is actually happening with this situation tonight, who knows? But let's just say if we know all of this, then you can be sure that the United States does as well, and possibly they see an opening to bring down the regime forever. Let's have a look to see what happens. Now get out.